Welcome, friends. It is a joy to have all of you with us. I'm sorry that I can't offer you a cup of tea from the little nook at Wilman Hill where we welcome you, but it is wonderful to have you all with us. And this program is a vision that started from Peter Blood Patterson, and we are so thrilled that Wilman Hill and Beacon Hill Friends House could collaborate on offering it. Wilman Hill is a Quaker retreat center on 100 acres of ridgetop in Western Massachusetts. We offer space for individual retreats and group gatherings, and we offer programs to Quakers and others. So it's a joy to have you all with us for this virtual series together. We're going to have a little bit of a tech intro after I'm through from Jen, our tech host. And then we'll settle into worship again for a few minutes, and out of that worship, Peter will introduce Carl, and Carl will offer some reflections and sharing, and then we'll have a little time for hearing the passage that Carl has chosen, and some small group sharing, and then for about 10 minutes, and then a larger group sharing. And at that point, you're welcome to leave or stay for another 15 to 20 minutes of open question and answer that we'll guide you through that as we go. So I want to invite you to settle into your body and take some deep breaths. Come fully into this space with each other. Let go what needs to move out of the way to be fully present. Embrace what will feed you in this next hour and a half or so. I invite you to feel the ground under you and be grateful for the land that holds us. At Wilman Hill, at midweek worship on Wednesday, the moon started rising just as we were ending our worship under the apple tree. So I invite you to call into yourself the images that help you ground. And I want to acknowledge the land at Wilman Hill where the Pecumtuck people were the first people there. And you may be acknowledging right now whatever land you are on and the peoples that have come before you on that land. We welcome all of you, whatever your familiarity or relationship with the Bible is, and whatever language you use, whether it's God and Jesus, or light, or spirit, or truth, whatever your language is, whatever your relationship to Quakerism is, we welcome you. We welcome you, whatever your spiritual and emotional condition is in this moment. Wherever your physical condition is, we welcome you. We invite you to be gentle with one another and to reach out to Jen, the tech host, if you have things that would help you be fully present. And we also invite you to let go of what is getting in your way. Welcome all. Jen, I think you are going to give a little tech intro.
Yes. Welcome, friends. My name is Jen Higgins-Newman, and I'm the program manager at Beacon Hill Friends House. And just to show you my lovely housemates and our executive director's new baby, Albert, who's in the left-hand corner here, Beacon Hill Friends House is a Quaker Center for Learning and Action, as well as a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values, and we're based in downtown Boston. Albert's very cute. That's all I have. Again, welcome, friends. And we're so glad to have you on this walk with us.
Welcome to you all. This has been a dream of ours to do this for a while. Actually, Adria Gulizia, who's going to be co-leading the session next month, was going to do a program at Woman Hill with me in March, just when the country was shutting down. So this is a way we can continue this without that. Margaret was a little bit ambivalent about doing a Bible weekend. She says, we haven't had a great track record with Bible weekends recently. And I said, we can make it happen. And well, it didn't happen there, but it's happening here. So you're showing there's a lot of thirst to do this kind of work together among friends. Without any further ado, I want to quickly move to getting started. Carl, I am thrilled that he's starting off our series. I got to know Carl, although he didn't get to know me, at FGC this summer when he was doing the Bible half hours there, which were truly amazing. And I urge you, I think it's in the chat, I hope, or somewhere, maybe it's in the handouts, the emails that went out initially about this event. But anyway, you can go to the FGC site and watch Carl give those sessions on Trickster Jesus. Carl's a chaplain, member of Strawberry Creek Meeting. Several of his elders are here with him today. He'll probably introduce them. And he's living, I believe, in San Diego. So he's kind of spread out right now. But Carl, say hello, and then I have an initial couple questions for you.
Well, howdy, folks. It's wonderful to have you join us. It's great to see all of your little tiny faces, and really grateful for Jen's help with the tech, and Margaret providing the Woman Hill venue, and for Peter for inviting me. I am accompanied by my elders, Elaine, Emily, and Valerie Nutman, and some of my anchor committee from Strawberry Creek Friends Meeting is also supporting, and my partner Mika is here holding us all in a sphere of light and love, so that we can have an encounter that is hopefully an encounter of one another, and also an encounter with the divine.
So Carl, to start us off, if you could just give us a glimpse of your own personal journey with the Bible, I think it might help people to get to know you a little bit. Well,
my journey with the Bible will not be unusual for folks who are cradle Quakers. And I was born in 1969 and been a Quaker from infancy. I was adopted, but from infancy. And I came into Quakerism at a period of time where the Bible had just hugely been chucked out the back window of the meeting house and sort of left in the grass and weeds behind the meeting house to molder. And part of the reason that happened was that in the West Coast particularly, virtually all of us were convinced friends. And so people had a solid background in the Bible from being raised Catholic or Methodist or Episcopalian, or my father Congregationalist. And so they just kind of assumed it and didn't realize that they were raising their kids without it. And so there was also a feeling sort of that maybe we were not just post-Christian, meaning Jesus and, right? Jesus and yoga, Jesus and, Nietzsche or whatever, but that we were sort of post-scripture. We were post-biblical, that the Bible was a problematic text and messy and, prone to lead people to intellectual, scientific, and moral errors. And so we sort of left it behind. And so when I went to seminary years and years later, to me, it was an opportunity to go back behind the meeting house and find this old leather-bound volume where pages had been torn out for squirrels' nests and the binding was rotting, and to bring it to these wise people at my seminary and say, this book has inspired the sort of radical creative love and action that I aspire to it's the text that inspires Martin Luther King and moves John Lewis and Dorothy Day and the folks who were going and trying to stop nuclear bombs by tying themselves to the gates of the Nevada test site. I want to understand the power and majesty of this book. And they took it from me and they put it into this chipper shredder machine that was labeled biblical criticism, and they took it apart. Historical criticism, archaeological criticism, feminist criticism, very interesting. And they just deconstructed it to nothing. And so it just came out as confetti. And I actually said this at the end of the first year of my biblical study. Like, I came wanting to understand the power of this text, and you've spent the year telling me why it's nonsense. Like, I don't even know why you bother being a professor of this, because all you seem to want to do is shred it. And so it was at that point that I realized I was going to have to do something a little bit differently. And what I did wittingly, I think, was to take the Quaker hermeneutic, the Quaker lens for understanding the text, which is that you can only understand the text if you're in the power that gave it forth. That was Fox's conviction. And so I assumed that Jesus was, in fact, what the text claims he is. That he is a sacred, fully enlightened incarnation of God mind, and read the book that way. And then it came to life. And then the lens that sort of presented itself to me after I had started to do that was also that Jesus was a trickster. That Jesus is there to pull the rug out from under our assumptions, our banal morality, our sense of our own ego importance, that we are somehow self-referential sources of truth and indelibility, and just to liberate us from all of that slavery. And that lens is still gives me a lot of life. And then the other scripture that I revere is the scripture of the created earth, the sacred earth. That's the basis of my being an earthquaker, is that I find a faith and practice in the created world. And that is also something that enlivens me and guides me and corrects me.
So I have another question, but it had to do with what you're finding the approaches that work best for you. But I'm actually going to wait and ask you that after, when we go to the kind of informal questions and discussion at 5:15. So I'd like to just get started by having you tell us what passage you chose. I think people probably saw that in the email that Jen sent out, but tell us why this passage rose for you in this hour, in this nation, in this time, that you felt in your heart this would be the right one for us to walk with today.
Well, first of all, I'll say with apology that I didn't want to do this text. I really wanted to do something that was fun and juicy, and we could sort of do some clever exegesis and what did this really mean in the original Greek or Hebrew, or but that's just me making plans so that God can laugh. And I had a clear leading that I was not to try to skirt lamentation. My place in the healthcare chaplaincy world is as a hospice and palliative care chaplain. So what I do is accompany people who are facing a life-limiting illness, who are concluding their life's journey. We call ourselves sometimes death midwives, that we don't do anything, but we try to create a nurturing environment for a natural process to take place. Midwives do a lot, don't get me wrong, but basically there's a process that has its own energy that we're stewarding. And one of the pieces of that is grief and fear and loss and anger and all of those things that we experience when we're facing our own death or the death of someone we love. And what we know about grief is that there is no way out but through. that we have to turn into the grieving and step into the grieving and allow ourselves to be changed by it. There used to be a metaphor for grief that was like a broken bone. I've got a big scar on my wrist there where I shattered it in a motorcycle wreck, and they put some screws in it, and it's like it never happened, right? That we heal as though it never happened. And what we know now is that profound grief shatters us, and we don't go back together immediately, and we don't go back together the same way. We will, most of us, come back together and be in some ways stronger and more resilient and more compassionate for having been floored by grief. But this is a time of profound grief. And we have grief of material possessions that are lost. We have grief for roles that are lost. I've lost my role as a dentist because I had to close my practice during COVID, say. We have the loss of people who have died, but also just, I talked to one woman and she says, I have not hugged anyone in 4 months. You know, she's grieving the loss of that connection. And we grieve what might have been. And that's a very hard kind of grief. And I think that we're grieving that now, particularly those of us who maybe are politically progressive or idealistic about the world or the nation that we could create. It feels like it is slipping away from us. And the grief for what that once was and may never be again. We don't know. So lamentation is what came to me. And I looked at a few, including the Book of Lamentations in the text. And I settled on Psalm 22. Not because it's so profound in and of itself relative to other Psalms of lament, but because it is kind of classic. And I'll say just briefly what I mean by that. There are 6 pieces to a psalm of lament, and they might not all be present, but generally most of them are, and they may or may not be in the order I'm going to give them to you, but they generally are. And just briefly, the first is an address to the divine. It's an imprecation or an invocation. The second is a description of our condition and situation, right? I am a lowly worm. I am surrounded by enemies. The third is a petition, what we want. We want liberation, or we want relief from suffering, or we want triumph for our people. The fourth is a declaration against enemies. You just can't escape it. We like to, as Quakers, pretend like enemies is just immature thinking, but there's a declaration against enemies. You can get in touch with your feeling that maybe you do have enemies right about now in the world who mean you harm. And the fifth is declaring our righteousness or our error and repentance, where we went wrong. And then the sixth is gratitude and praise. And the importance of the gratitude and praise, the lament, it being a prayer, is that even though we're expressing this anguish, we may be angry at God, we may be saying, God, what are you doing? We are turning towards. And a lot of folks were reciting the Mourner's Kaddish for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Kaddish means sacralizing, to make sacred. And we make our grief sacred, and that prayer is a prayer of thanksgiving and praise. And so it's a really important part that if we can do our lamenting, it turns us again to the divine. And from there, I trust, to the liberation of all of our feelings, the escape from apathy, and feeling all of our feelings, and then getting in touch with our creative energy, our love energy, so that we can be a force for good in this world as it moves into chaos. Things are loosened up so that new things are possible. But we need to be in a condition to be part of those new things. So it's lamentation, it's Psalm 22. Do you have another question, Peter, or should we hear the psalm?
I think we should hear the psalm.
All right. So we have 3 readers, and they're going to read the psalm together. They've been invited to read expressively because the psalm is a cri de coeur, a cry of the heart. And it expresses anguish. So our first reader is Max Elizabeth, and then Deborah Haynes and Fran Lightsome, and I want to thank them for being willing. Max.
Thank you. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth, and since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help.
Many bulls encircle me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves. For my clothing, they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion.
From the horns of the wild oxen, you have rescued me. I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. To him, indeed, shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it.
If you find the praising of God and dominion and whatnot a little excessive, I'll just offer you Paramahansa Yogananda's interpretation of that, which is that God being perfect and having created the world wanted for nothing, being perfect, but then created humanity with free will. So the only thing in the universe that God cannot command is our praise, our love, and our appreciation. And so it is the only thing that we can offer. So I like that idea. It dovetails with St. Francis admonishment to preach the gospel at all times and only if necessary use words. So that is the lament. Now, do we want to do groups or we have time? I need a time check, sorry.
So,
have a few minutes.
I think, Carl, let's go ahead, unless you want to you're going to frame the groups. We're actually going to have a little longer, 15 minutes. We're doing well on time, I think, or close to that for the groups. But Carl, why don't you just offer, unless you want to say something else, feel free, but I do want you to share the queries that you're sending to them. So it's up to you, Carl.
Well, there's just one other piece then that I will share brief. No, well, time is always my enemy. So this is what came to me this morning in my work. You know that when I was working with Trickster Jesus, I worked with Coyote, I worked with some Native American spirituality. I hope respectfully, it's not my tradition, one must tread lightly. And one of the things I learned was that the tradition of the sacred fool, and I found out that Black Elk was actually of that tradition. And Black Elk was given a vision when he was younger that he would speak to the people 4 times in service to their liberation. Okay, so this is a tribal people. The Hebrew people are tribal people. I see a correlation. And at the end of his life, he had not spoken the 4th time. And so he offers a lamentation, and I'm just going to read a little excerpt of it. And it follows much of the same format. Grandfather, Great Spirit, once more behold me on earth and lean to hear my feeble voice. You live first and are older than all need, older than all prayer. All things belong to you, the 2-leggeds, the 4-leggeds, the wings of the air, and all green things that live. You have said to me when I was still young and could hope, that in difficulty I should send a voice 4 times, once for each quarter of the earth. Today I send a voice for a people in despair. With tears running, O Great Spirit, my grandfather, with running tears I must say that the tree, the sacred tree, has never bloomed. A pitiful old man you see me here, and I have fallen away and done nothing. Again, and maybe the last time on this earth, I recall the great vision that you sent me. It may be that some little root of the sacred tree still lives. Nourish it then, that it may leaf and bloom and fill with singing birds. Hear me, not for myself, but for my people, for my nation, Israel, right? For my people. I am old. Hear me, that they may once more go back into the sacred hoop and find the good red road, the shielding tree. And we know that for Black Elk, just as in the book of Lamentation, just as in the book of Job, if you do not know this, the little happy fairy tale ending at the book of Job was tacked on by a later writer. It doesn't end well. And to truly grieve, we have to step into the possibility that it doesn't end well. And after we do our group, I'll tell you a little about the sacred tradition of Black Elk that connects to our work of liberating our spiritual imagination. But let's go into groups. What I'm going to ask you to do is a worship sharing kind of format. But we are going to talk about our grief and our pain. So to sort of strengthen that format, I'm going to offer you 3 roles. And some of you are pairs, so you'll just figure out how to do this. But the 3 roles are the speaker, the listener, and then the other person or 2 people will hold those 2 in the light, hold them in prayer, hold them in an unconditional positive regard. And the speaker will respond to the queries that we give, and then it will switch, and you'll go around like that, okay? So the 3 queries, And you'll be sent into the group by Jen, I should say, and then you'll come back automatically. So you don't need to worry about going into your little group. I don't have the 3 queries.
I can give the queries, Carl.
That's probably good. Sorry.
Okay. So the first question is, I had it right here. Oh, I'm sorry, there it is. What is your lament at this time? The second question is, and this is the one I don't have as clearly, I believe it was, how will your lament help you to move with the divine at this moment?
They're in the chat too, yeah.
Yes. The third question is, what is Spirit saying to you right now as you hear these words of the psalmist?
We have a question from Marcel Martin. What's the difference between being the listener and the one who holds the conversation?
So if I'm listening as a chaplain would listen, maybe to a lament, I am listening to the words and I'm listening to the heart in such a way that if I was asked to pray for that person, I could spontaneously give a prayer that had the essence of what their lament is in it. So I'm hearing, you know, my sister's been sick, or my cat died and that was the only living person in the house with me, or I'm hearing. But when I'm holding, I'm underneath the words. I'm trusting that the listening is being done by the other person and that my soul is hearing, but I might not be able to give you a good accounting of the words because I'm just holding that sacred duo of speaking the pain and the grief and listening to the pain and the grief. I'm holding them so that they can do that exquisitely. Just holding them in prayer. Eldering, if you will.
So I heard from Carl before the break that he had a little more on his heart before we open this up. For in a couple of minutes, we're going to allow people to share what's on your hearts out of silence, kind of like worship sharing, I guess. But basically, you can go where you want to. It's not really questions. It's more what is rising in you. And we'll do that through the raised hand feature. So be sure you've got your participant list up so you know how to raise your hand. But Carl, are you with us back? Is Carl returned? Yep. You had, I think, a few more words before we started allowing people to share.
So some of you may know that one of my teachers has been Joanna Macy, who is, she is actually the person who coined the phrase, the Great Turning, from the Industrial Growth Society, which we're enmeshed in up to our gills, and the Life Sustaining Society. And the beginning of that Great Turning is the Great Unraveling. So if you feel like you might be part of a great unraveling, the good news is that it's part of an arc of the Great Turning towards the Life Sustaining Society, which we might, as friends, see as the peaceable kingdom, that the kingdom is at hand. And one of the things that she talks about is apathy or apatheia. And like apolitical or apoplectic, maybe, where you are without poplectism, means without. It just means without. And it's without pathos, without feeling. That's what apathy is. And when we don't grieve our grief, we we go flat, we turn gray, we don't feel our other feelings either. And so if we want to be liberative agents for the transformation of the world to the peaceable kingdom, we need to have all of our parts working. And that sort of is basic psychology, right? That's pretty well understood. M. Scott Peck probably has some very good stuff on that. And so what was interesting for me in digging again into a little bit into Black Elk is that when Black Elk had his first vision, he brought it back to the tribe and they created a ceremony to reenact it. And that was so that the tribe could be inside of his vision. And in the midst of that, Spirit showed up. And for him, the difference between, is this my ceremony about my vision or is this the vision? Are these the four figures on roan horses, or is this just an enactment of? That distinction blurred. So it says something about what the worship is. But when he started out to have his second vision after a long winter of being separate from Spirit, do you feel like you've been part of a long winter, summer, and feeling maybe a little bit far from the sweetness of being accompanied? Maybe you're not feeling that, but I think I have felt that sometimes in the last while. What he says is that his first duty when spring came was to go lamenting. And that when you go lamenting, you need a wise medicine man. And he chooses an old man named Few Tails, T-A-I-L-S, to accompany him. And they go off alone because lamenting is, some parts of lament are a group, a communal thing, and some parts are individual. And so he's cleansed and he does a sweat and he's rubbed down with sage. And then I clipped this out because I wanted to get it right in his own words. So he went, so he's cleansed. And then Few Tails now told me what I was to do so that the spirits would hear me and make clear my next duty was to stand in the middle of the sacred hoop, crying and praying for understanding. And so I was crying and, I'm ellipsing. So he's crying in this worshipful way, in this ceremonial way. And Spirit starts to fill him up and he starts to be visited. And he says, until now, I had only been trying to weep. So it's this intentionality, right? Like the written lament, like I am intending to lament consciously. I had only been trying to weep, but now I really wept. And the tears ran down my face. For as I looked yonder towards the place whence came the life of all things, the nation's hoop and the flowering tree, I thought of the days when my relatives, now dead, were living and young and of Crazy Horse. I cried very hard, and I thought it might be better if my crying would kill me, and I could be in the outer world where nothing is ever in despair. And so he's standing there in this prayer in what we would call a vision quest, what we've come to learn as a Native American vision quest, but he calls it lamenting. And as he's crying, he is visited by these ancestors and by these spiritual beings, which give him then his sacred commission to his people. So the ceremonial arc from intentionally, consciously saying, I am in agony and sorrow and brokenness for the state of the world that I live in, my life, the life of my children, the life that they might have, and lifting that up and then being visited by beings, by a message, by the light rising up that gives us purpose and direction, that the lamentation is directly related. So I found that so compelling and so true, but we don't have a ceremony. We don't have a ritual for it. And Marcel Martin recently asked me if I felt that Friends of maybe that there might be some power in ritual that we needed to be open to. And I think that's a place where we can touch things like our deep grief in ceremonial space, in sacred space. that we can't otherwise access in the same way. And we can't get the transformative power that Henri Nouwen talks about, that turns the sacred wound into a source of power for us. So I am just eager to hear if any of you had an experience of speaking your truth in what I hope was a sacred container, and finding that somehow your grief was moved or transformed, or that you were able to see it in a different way, carry it in a different way. Maybe you wrote a note to carry in your meditations going forward. And so if anyone wanted to share anything or ask a question along the lines of this question of lamentation as a transforming power to liberate our spiritual imagination, I would love to hear it.
I have been lamenting, sort of privately and not very consciously, that I find myself in my regular worship on Sundays and not really feeling connected to the Spirit, and shared that also with someone who brought it up in July. So it's been going on for a while. And today, when I spoke about it in the lament, I didn't hear it, but I felt it. And it's like, no, I'm here. I'm here.
Fran Broca.
The thing that came to me today in speaking about my lament was a vision. It was really the question of, how does this bring me closer to the divine? And I had a vision of myself as a child, brokenhearted about whatever a 6-year-old might get brokenhearted about, and being held as I sobbed by my mother or my father, and just being held during that grief. And so what comes to me is I need to allow God to hold me in that way.
I love that when we speak it, then we allow something else in, because grief is the other side of love, right? It has to be held as sacred. Are you doing the hands up, Jen, or am I?
I'm recognizing people. Marina Rothman.
I want to say that lamenting actually was the process that convinced me. I have been brought up as an atheist, and when I arrived to this country 40 years ago, I experienced a lot of discrimination. And I chose a difficult path in my life. And it was the moment when I was able to open my heart to the Spirit that I could experience a transformation that I started seeking where it comes from. And I am so thankful to the Spirit to show me that path, a path to Quakers, and a path in my life to conquer a lot of battles I found the strength in it, and I appreciate today to be reminded of it, how much gift I was given by being able to experience the transformation of a grief into a love that cradles us and brings goodness to this world. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Doug to share, since Doug's had a great loss of a very special person recently. You can unmute, Doug.
Okay, I thought Jen was doing it for us. The thing that's come to me several times, I've heard people say something like, sometimes it doesn't end well. And the immediate reaction I've had to that is, well, yes, but it doesn't end anyway. You know, individually we die and we lose track of what's going on, I guess. But I'm, you know, in theory, I've known this, but in practice, you know, noticing the things in my life that are aspects of Anne, that's things that she's given me that are still here. I have a lot of grief that I'm having trouble getting through, and this doesn't make it so that I don't have to do that by any means, but it gives me a sense that there's a ground there someplace. There's something solid that eventually comes around.
Thank you for your courage.
Is Helen Pollock? I'll unmute you. Hold on. There you go.
Helene Pollock in Philadelphia. I'm committed to Jesus Christ, and his story is teaching me every day. So I hear our presentation and our sharing in light of that. I think of in the beginning of Jesus's ministry when John the Baptist said, a greater one than me is coming. I always knew that Jesus was better than me. I always knew there was more for me than myself. I had a great spiritual awakening in my mid-50s, and I truly felt like a beloved child of God, and I loved God with all my heart as no other time. That softened me and made me pure love. It made me only want love and want a ministry of love beyond anything I had known. So that was like Jesus's baptism, when the love that God felt for him was like the love of a parent and child. Then Jesus went in the wilderness, and I never thought that my awakening would lead me into such deep lament. I lamented for 10 years. I did everything I could to get out of lament, and clearly it was not within my power. I had all kinds of spiritual resources. I did fall more deeply in love with early friends. I loved them from when I first met them, when I had my awakening, all the way through those 10 years. They were my companions. I think of Paulette Meyer and her music and how those songs spoke to me so deeply, and I committed them to memory. And I resigned my membership. I stayed on the outside. I tried to contribute in helpful ways. After the 10 years, I was refined and tested, more clear than ever that I wanted to only serve God and not myself. I wanted my ego to diminish. I wanted the things of God, including Jesus, to be raised up in me and in my life, that's all people would see in me. Mm. And when I was with people who found Jesus offensive or hard to relate to, Jesus clearly could stay in the background, because the principle was to get through and meet heart to heart. And I don't need to push any words or doctrine on anybody. I certainly don't need people to be like me. My deepest lament is still for the Religious Society of Friends. Mm. It's born of a very, very deep love for our tradition and a commitment to live it with my life. Jesus is my guide. I feel our tradition opens the door to Jesus, opens the door to a new vision of the Christ way. Many of the words we've heard Carl use are fresh and new. They represent his new light on what is for many dead tradition. Maybe we can wake up. My theme is to only serve God, to continually diminish, to be honest about what I lament, but to be very clear that the power of God is greater than any challenge that I or anyone else will ever find.
I love that. I think a lot of us have a certain lament, and maybe have for a long time, for the Society of Friends and its vitality. And are we a people of faith on fire, or are we a people of faith who would really like to keep it cool? Thank you very much. And but what that potential is, what those seeds are, what our inheritance is. Yeah. Thank you, Helene.
Bill Fitz.
My experience in this lamenting was I realized the difference between lamenting and whining. And I realized that lamenting means giving it up to God rather than holding it myself and whining. Mm.
Ravenna.
I had an experience that took me by surprise. On Friday, my mother passed after a year of being silenced by a stroke and needing daily care. And as I lamented so strongly during that time, I saw such love and care. And I was so uplifted during that year that when she passed and I saw her, the shell that she was now, it became clear to me that she had joined what I call Christ. And the lessons of her life were now available to me to unpack as long as I need, in the time that I need. And that was such a relief.
Ravenna, will you give us her name so that we can honor her?
Her name is Ravenna M. Helson. My name is Ravenna A. Helson. Mm.
I think we have time for one more. And Glenn, I think you still have your hand up.
muted, Glenn. You should have a push notification to unmute yourself now.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, I experienced something I did not expect. I'm often very anxious with desire to be in control of things, including in control of myself. And yet, as I listened to my friends express their grief and their lamentations, and I thought about my own, I had this very strong feeling of letting go of that need to be in control. And maybe even more significantly to me, I felt this strong need to let go of thinking that God is in control of everything. That really, all that matters is that the divine is with us, no matter what we're going through. And that's really what I want, and what I need is the presence of God. So letting go of control is for me, the amazing thing that happened to me during the session.
So, Carl, we're running close to our transition here into the more informal sharing. Do you want to say a couple sentences? I'm going to do something before we break.
I think Glenn moved us to the transition, because I think that piece, Glenn, about not needing to be in control, which means not needing to win, not needing to, right, all of those things. And even relating to what Helene said about Quakerism, you know, this thing that's been plaguing me. Ben Pink Dandelion said casually at a retreat, Quakerism is a means to an end. And it's a means to draw us closer to God, just as Helene has said. But if it's not doing that, we don't need to be attached even to Quakerism, right? We don't need to be in control, but we do know that we will always be accompanied. We may not feel accompanied, but as Thomas Kelly says, the hound of heaven is ever baying on our heels, and God is there when we allow ourselves to be held in those arms, as we heard earlier. But being a radical force in the world, if you are called, if you have an authentic leading, and feeling like you need to be faithful and at the same time you're not in control, well, then you're free. John Lewis said that when he had figured out that all they could do was beat his body or imprison it, if they couldn't, in other words, damage his soul, he was unafraid. And then he could live this radical life, that liberation comes in surrendering control and holding on to faithfulness.
Amen, brother.
Amen.
So I was grateful that, Carl, you said that praise is part of lamentation. And I have a tendency to go too fast to praise, but I'm going to take a moment here, and I think this will work. Carl and I debated back and forth between two ways to look at this psalm. One is the NRSV, which is a sort of traditional way, and the other is the book called The Message, the translation called The Message. And so I'm going to read the closing lines, or a few lines from the Message version in the praise part of the psalm. And I don't think this is fully true, but I pray that it will be more and more. From the four corners of the earth, people are coming to their senses, are running back to God. Long lost families are falling on their faces before him. God has taken charge. From now on, he or she has the last word. All the power mongers are before him, worshiping. All the poor and powerless too, worshiping. Along with those who never got it together, worshiping. Our children and their children will get in on this as the word is passed along from parent to child. babies not yet conceived will hear the good news that God does what she says. Let's close with a few moments of grateful worship, and then we'll wrap up. So thank you all for being part of this launching of a new experiment. One of the things we can't do, I don't know if she made it today, but I know Emma Condori was hoping to be with us from Bolivia. Maybe she'll be making it next month if she didn't this time. Thanks to Carl for being our guest leader today. Thanks to Woolman Hill and Beacon Hill, especially Jen and Margaret for all the hard work they put into this. Thanks to our 3 psalm readers and to the elders that work with Carl so faithfully. The next month will be Adria Galizia. She was at New England Yearly Meeting as one of the plenary speakers a couple of years ago, and she is quite amazing. A little younger, I think, than me, but anyway, she has a lot on her heart about the Bible. And Colin Saxton was with us today. I don't know if he's still with us, but he will be our guest leader in December. And he's also been a Bible half hours at New England Yearly Meeting not long ago. So these will be extraordinary sessions, I am sure. You can, if you haven't signed up for all 3, you certainly can go back and sign up. It's all pay as led, what you can afford. We want everyone to feel welcome. And what's going to happen now is you're welcome to leave. Many of you have important things to go to, but Carl has graciously to stick around, as am I. We will end this sharing informally not later than 5:45. If it peters out sooner, we'll do it before then, 2:45 on the West Coast. And let's at least try the raising hands for a bit. If it gets to be okay, to be more informal, we'll do that. You don't have to wait for silence. Carl's going to get the first word here in, but I'm sure you have questions for Carl. What were you going to say before we start with back and forth more informally?
Well, before folks go, I just want to thank you so much for being present to this experiment. I am very excited about Adria and Colin's presentations, and I will see you there. And I wanted to invite you, if you find that this question of lament follows with you, that it's alive for you, that you consider writing your own lament. That requires you to lament consciously, like Glenn was talking about, you know, to be deliberate and intentional. And you can maybe just put that on a shelf. We wouldn't say altar as Quakers, but maybe a shelf in your house where you keep little sacred things that matter. And maybe there's someone that you would want to share it with. And maybe you would share it with yourself. And if you felt inclined, I would love it if you wanted to email me your lament. I would not share it with anyone without your permission. But think about just that first step of just writing it uncritically and bringing to it your own cri de coeur. I see Rua and Louis, and I know that they have a lament for the state of earth that's very deep and very heartfelt. And I think we need to write those down and call them sacred and hold them up. So thank you so much for being willing to accompany and to do this hard work. I promise one day I'm going to bring a session or a workshop that's just going to be pure fun and games.